Tonight, you dim the lights and let your shoulders settle. You enter a small room in a timber house where the air smells of wood smoke and rosemary. The town has gone quiet except for a cartwheel far away and the last bell from the parish tower. You are a traveler in the late Middle Ages, and you have come to keep company with a young bride who fears her first night. You will not intrude. You will listen. If this gentle journey helps you rest, you may choose to subscribe so that more nights can be softened. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is for you. Tonight we will move slowly and breathe with the quiet of the room. You sit near the hearth and watch the way a thin flame licks the last lines of a candle. Records suggest that medieval first nights were rarely private in the way you might expect. The day has already been crowded with eyes and customs. The couple has walked through a village that knows both of their families. There has been bread and ale and a blessing. There may have been a song that made the old laugh and the young blush. The fear that tightens around the bride has many threads. Some scholars argue that the fear is not only about the unknown of the marital bed, it is about reputation, law, medicine, and faith pressing into a single hour. In many places, the bedding has been a ritual. Elders have led the pair to the room. There is a procession with whispering and nervous laughter. The bed is shown like an altar of ordinary life. The linen is clean and newly woven. A cross may hang above it. Someone has scattered herbs to guard against envy and sickness. Rosemary for remembrance, rue for protection. In some towns, the guests stay just long enough to be sure that the room is proper and the couple safe. In other towns, the witnesses linger longer at the threshold than kindness requires. Evidence indicates that forms of watching created a kind of pressure that made the first night feel less like a private beginning and more like an exam that a young woman could pass or fail. You place a hand on the chest that holds the linen. It smells of fresh flax and starch. The sheet within is not only cloth, it is a document waiting to be read by a mother-in-law or a gossiping neighbor. Some communities believe that the morning should bring a sign, a stain to prove a story about the body. Records suggest that this expectation rested on medical ideas that were often wrong. The body is not a contract that behaves on command, yet a culture that reveres order asks for tokens of order. A bride learns this lesson long before she learns the shape of her new household. She learns it from the women who prepare her hair and her veil. She learns it from the songs that joke about what is serious. She learns it from the way the dowry is counted and the way the keys of the house change hands. You turn to the wall where a small vial of holy water hangs from a nail. A priest has come and gone. He has blessed the room. He has spoken of duty and comfort. He has not banished fear. The fear has older roots. It grows in the soil of childbirth that is dangerous, of reputations that can be broken by a whisper of laws that tie property to lineage. Some scholars argue that the first night is less about bodies and more about documents that will be written later. A marriage register that secures an alliance, a baptism that confirms a future heir, a will that names a child and a garden and a cow. The night feels heavy because tomorrow depends on it. There is another shadow that people will speak of in later centuries. You have heard the tale of a lord who claims the right to a bride on her first night. The phrase travels well. It is sensational and cruel. Evidence from many archives indicates that this story is largely legend rather than law. It appears in satire, in accusation, and in the anxieties of later writers. That does not mean that power was kind. Lords demanded taxes and labor and many forms of deference. But the specific claim that a legal right allowed a lord to enter a bed because of rank does not stand well when it is tested against records. Naming this matters because real fears deserve the dignity of truth. The bride in this room fears things that are already heavy enough. She fears the talk of neighbors. She fears a sheet that may show nothing and still be argued over. She fears pain that she cannot name in a time before safe medicine. She fears the duty to be cheerful about all of it. You look at the objects that will carry her through the night: a small lamp made of clay, a comb of boxwood with broken teeth, a belt with a little clasp that an aunt insisted she wear embroidered with a verse, a cup of spiced wine set near the bed to warm courage and make sleep possible. In some places, women trusted charms that were sewn into seams. In others, they trusted the older women who would come at dawn and ask careful questions and set a pace for the first weeks. Records suggest that these elder voices could be kind and could be cruel. They guarded the gate of respectability. They could soften a story or harden it. You listen at the low window. Wind moves the thatch, and a smell of damp earth slips into the room. Behind the cottage, the village path is still busy with whispers. Some travelers insist that guests used to fling stockings toward the bed in a playful game, believing that the first stocking to land would predict the first child. Some songs celebrated the new household with comic advice. A few lines were harmless and a few were rough. Traditions varied from England to France to the German lands and beyond. The shape changed, but the pressure remained. A first night belonged not only to two people, it belonged to the storytellers who would use it later to explain why good fortune came to a house or why sorrow visited it. You sit closer to the bride. She is quiet. Her hands have been folded all day. Now she breathes as if she is learning a new instrument. You remind her that nothing in the room has the right to rush her. Not the candle that burns down. Not the old advice that arrives like a command. You remind her that many marriages have learned their rhythm slowly. Some scholars argue that patience was the most important virtue a couple could share in a world where life was full of work and winter. The bride nods as if she has heard this before, but needed to hear it again in a room where the linen waits like a witness. You think about the men in the story. The groom is frightened too. He knows what has been said at the table and in the yard. He knows how his own standing will be measured by jokes he did not write. He has been told that mastery is a sign of manhood. He has not been told how to be tender in a room that feels like a courtroom. He has been taught to value honor, but not how to make a space where two lives can meet without fear. Evidence indicates that many couples learned these arts by themselves, slow and imperfect, behind doors that were thin. The candle shortens. The elders have finally withdrawn. The room is theirs. You leave your seat by the hearth and let the warmth soak into your palms one last time. The night is not solved, it is softened. You step toward the door and pause. Outside, the sky holds a few stubborn stars. Inside, the linen lies very still. Tomorrow will bring talk and perhaps a folded sheet and perhaps a small gift in the morning that names the promise of provision. Records suggest that the morning gift gave a wife a measure of security that could help her withstand the storms of a household. It was money or land or a promise written into the memories of witnesses. You lift the latch and promise to return. In the next part, you will stand at the threshold of dawn and look closely at the sheet, at the words people used to interpret it, and at the law and medicine that taught them those words. You will listen to midwives and clerks and priests and learn how their voices shaped the first weeks of a marriage. You will move with care as always and keep the night gentle. You return at first light when the room is the color of milk. The hearth holds a shy glow and the window pane is cold to your palm. The village is only beginning to stir. A cart creaks somewhere, and a rooster tries a hesitant call. The night has been survived, which is already a kind of victory in a world that measures courage in small breaths rather than battles. You keep your steps soft. You are here to witness how a morning turns fear into a story that a household can live with. You notice the sheet folded on the chest. It is linen from last autumn's flax, bleached on grass, pressed with a warm stone. Today it is not only cloth, it is a page that some people expect to read. Records suggest that many communities treated this morning like a small court. There were impressions to be made, proofs to be hinted at, futures to be protected. Some scholars argue that the sheet gathered too many meanings for one object to carry. It was asked to speak for law, medicine, reputation, and hope all at once. The bride sits near the low stool with a shawl around her shoulders. The groom waits by the door, unsure whether to step out to the yard or remain still as furniture. The quiet stretches. Then the women of the house arrive, not with trumpets, but with the choreography of care. A mother sets a clean basin on the table. An aunt lays a sprig of rosemary beside it so that the steam will lift a scent that says protection. A neighbor carries a small loaf and a cup of warm spiced wine. They do not ask questions at first. They tidy. They adjust a curtain. They speak of weather. They create a space where the night can be folded into the day without breaking it. When the moment feels safe, the linen is lifted. In some places, it is shown only to a few trusted eyes. In others, it is carried discreet but not invisible to the older women who are known to interpret such things. Evidence indicates that people often believed in a sign that might appear, and that this sign would confirm a story about the body. Yet medical understanding in the period was uncertain. Bodies are various. What is expected does not always happen. What happens can mean many things. Some scholars argue that the real power of the morning was not in a spot on a cloth, but in the way witnesses agreed to narrate the couple into belonging. To belong is to be defended by words when facts are fragile. You look around the room and see the small artifacts that help the narrative along. A boxwood comb with two teeth missing, a narrow belt with a soft clasp that will soon hold the household keys, a plain ring on the bride's finger, a wax tablet and stylus where a clerkly cousin will note a few details for memory, a prayer book open to a psalm about shelter, a ribbon with a charm sewn into it, a knot that a grandmother swears keeps envy from the door. Objects are never just objects in a house like this. They are tools for telling. Law sits quietly in the corner as well, though it does not wear a robe. In many places, marriage was understood through two related ideas: consent given in public, life joined in private. When disputes arose later, people returned to these two doors. Records suggest that courts listened to witnesses who had seen the wedding words and to matrons who could speak about the household thereafter. Sometimes marriages were challenged with claims of prior betrothal or of an inability to live as husband and wife. In such cases, elders and midwives might be called to offer cautious testimony. Outcomes were not uniform. Distance and custom and rank all pressed upon the scale. But the pattern teaches something simple. The first weeks mattered. They provided the evidence that later arguments would search for. Medicine in this world is a language of balances: hot and cold, dry and moist, strong and weak. The morning is a time to set the balances gently. A small broth is warmed with parsley or dill. A cup of wine is heated with cinnamon or a little ginger if the family can afford it. A cloth is dampened with water in which rue has been steeped for protection. These comforts are not cures in a modern sense. They are signals to the body to settle and to the mind to trust that older hands have guided many young couples through this threshold. Some scholars argue that the social medicine of reassurance did as much work as any herb. You remember that fear was never only inside this room. It lives in streets and markets and in the quick stories that travel faster than carts. To meet that wider fear, communities developed small rituals that turned risk into shared luck. In one town, stockings are tossed toward the bedpost, and the first to hook predicts the first child. In another place, a coin is slipped under the mattress, so that prosperity will remember the house when harvest is lean. A baker swears that a crust saved from the wedding loaf, dried and grated into morning pottage, keeps quarrels thin. These are not laws. They are gentle inventions that allow neighbors to feel helpful. They give the day a pattern, and patterns are a kind of safety. A curious tidbit drifts through the doorway with the next visitor. He is the piper who played after the blessing. He says that in a nearby village, the bell ringer once made a little mistake and rang the noon bell at dawn for a wedding morning. Ever since, the couple has told their children that the confusion brought them extra luck because time itself bent to give them a kinder start. People keep such stories because they offer mercy disguised as humor. The bride says little. She watches the steam rise from the basin and lets her shoulders come down a little at a time. The groom moves closer, careful but not timid, and places the cup of warm wine on the table within her reach. He has learned something precious in the night. He has learned that tenderness is not weakness. He has learned that silence can be work. He has learned that they will build a life by keeping time with each other rather than with the voices in the yard. Before the door opens again, you step into the small lane outside to watch how the village prepares to read the day. A clerk walks past with a bundle of papers wrapped in cloth. He is headed to the house where he keeps a list of marriages, dowries, and mourning gifts. Not every parish keeps a perfect register in this century, but many keep some memory written down. The mourning gift will be noted whether it is a small strip of land by the stream, a promise of a cow at Michaelmas, or a sum to be paid if misfortune comes. Such notes protect a wife from being entirely at the mercy of weather or of pride. Records suggest that this practice offered real security to many women, enough to shape how they face the first seasons of marriage. You return inside as the elder women gather their shawls. The linen has been refolded. No one has raised a voice. No one has demanded a spectacle. The story for the day is simple. The couple is well. The house is in order. The herbs have done their work. The neighbors will be told that the morning was good. In this world, the difference between fear and peace can be as small as a sentence spoken by the right mouth at the right time. The bride is standing now. Someone ties her hair with a ribbon the color of wheat. Someone else shows her where the keys will hang when she feels ready to wear them. A cousin brings in a new broom as a small joke and a small gift because every new household must begin its sweep. The door opens and the light grows. You can almost hear the day decide to be kind. Hold this softness. The first night is never erased, but the morning can shape its edges. In the next part, you will follow the midwife on her rounds and listen to what she teaches about the weeks after a wedding. You will also visit the clerk in his room of papers and watch how he writes a marriage into the memory of the town. Between healing hands and steady handwriting, a fragile beginning becomes a life that can be carried. You step into the lane while the house rearranges itself around a new morning. Frost clings to the last leaves on the hedges. A thin mist lies low over the ditch where geese whisper and shuffle. From the far end of the street, a woman approaches with a basket on her arm and a strap across her shoulder that steadies the weight. She is the midwife, though she answers to her given name in a voice that carries both warning and comfort. She has come not to deliver a baby. She has come to measure a beginning, because surviving the first night is one thing and learning the rhythm of the weeks is another. She sets the basket on the bench by the door and lifts its lid. Linen folded clean, a small jar of oil, a packet of herbs tied with thread, a thin knife whose edge is kept more for cutting cord and bread than for anything fierce, a wool cap to keep the head warm after a bath, a spoon carved from boxwood, a vial with a pinch of salt. These are not tools of spectacle. They are instruments of ordinary mercy. Records suggest that in many villages, the midwife was the first authority a new couple met after the priest had gone, and that her counsel often did more to steady a household than any sermon could do. Inside the room, she moves with the tidy energy of a person who has learned to say serious things gently. She warms water in a small pot. She crushes a few leaves of rosemary between her fingers so that the steam carries a bright scent. She asks for no dramatic report. She watches how the bride sits. She watches how the groom holds his shoulders. She asks whether there is any pain that should be tended and whether rest was possible. Evidence indicates that the best midwives offered a kind of shared breathing to the room. They set the tempo slower than custom expected so that fear could drain away without needing to be named aloud. The bride listens while the woman speaks of pacing. Sleep first. Supper that is mild and warm. A walk in the sun when the ground is dry. She reminds the pair that bodies learn in patient steps. Some scholars argue that communities taught a quiet spacing of embraces in the early weeks, less from prudery and more from an older medicine that prized balance and recovery. Hot and cold, moist and dry, strong and tender. The midwife does not say the words of the humors with any flourish. She pours the warm water into a basin and dips the cloth and shows how to soothe muscles that have learned to be afraid. She praises the cup of wine on the table, but suggests it be thinned a little with water. She sets a sprig of rue near the window to ask envy to keep its distance. She opens the chest. She inspects the linen with the same dignity she would give a letter. She refuses to treat cloth as a verdict. She treats it as laundry. The room relaxes at the sound of her voice describing soap and sun and the slow craft of bleaching flax on the grass. It is a way of changing the subject without lying. It is a way of letting the morning be domestic rather than judicial. Records suggest that such reframing was a real social medicine and that many families leaned on it without noticing that a kindness had just been done. You watch the midwife write a few neat lines on her own wax tablet. Date written out. House named. 2 short notes that she will remember without even looking because she knows the town like a map she keeps in her hand. She tells the bride to keep herbs in a small pouch near the bed and to air the sheet in good weather. She tells the groom to repair the loose latch on the door before the wind grows bold. Survival is a long plain road, she says, not a cliff to leap. The couple nods as grateful for the chores as for the counsel. A curious tidbit bubbles up while she talks. In one nearby village, she says people never leave a knot tied in the bedchamber. During the first weeks, not even a ribbon on a prayer book. They say that knots teach the body to refuse. So the midwife unties and reties with a gentler loop and laughs that luck is often made of little gestures that give the heart an alibi to hope. People keep such customs because they organize worry into actions that hands can manage. When her basket is closed again, you walk with her along the lane. She stops twice to ask after an elder, with a winter cough and a young mother whose milk is slow. The world she tends is not only of births and fevers, it is of feelings that need a safe shelf. She earns a fee sometimes in coin and sometimes in eggs and sometimes in the promise of help at harvest. Evidence indicates that her standing in the village rose and fell with results that were not always under her control. Yet networks of women guarded her from the roughest judgments because they knew how much of life depended on the steady hands that would not shame them. At the square you leave her and step under a low eave where a sign hangs that reads like a trade and a promise. Quills, ink, writings. The clerk keeps his room here, and he opens the door with a nod that is both practical and polite. The air smells of iron gall and scraped vellum. Sand for drying sits in a shallow dish. A sheet of paper waits under a small stone to keep the corner flat. He does not ask why you have come. He assumes that you are part of the town's habit of remembering itself. He lifts a ledger from the shelf and lays it down to the right of the window, where the light is kind to ink. The pages bear a careful hand. Names followed by the feast day that mark the wedding. Lines that note the dowry promised and the morning gift delivered or deferred. A shorter column where witnesses sign with their marks across or a letter learned by heart. Records suggest that in some regions formal parish registers were uneven before later centuries, yet many towns kept lists that served as anchors in disputes. The clerk knows this. He writes so that later arguments will have to pass through his room before they reach a judge. He writes so that memory will not depend on the loudest voice in the yard. You study his tools. A penknife with a small curl of feather caught beside it. A stopper of wax pushed flat by a thumb. A packet of sand that hushes the shine of new ink. A length of string that ties a bundle of folded letters, one from a cousin far away who reports a price for wool, one from a father who names the field that will pass as part of a morning gift when the snow is gone. The clerk treats paper as wood that will someday hold a roof. He builds with it. Evidence indicates that widows and wives alike leaned on such pages when weather or misfortune tested their security. The morning gift, modest or not, gave a woman a foothold in the economy of survival. The clerk reads back what he has written. He speaks the names carefully, letting each syllable arrive with the weight of a small bell. He asks if the spelling is the spelling the family uses. He asks if the neighbor who witnessed the feast should stand as witness again when the couple comes to register the first child, should such luck come. Some scholars argue that this slow naming helped people feel that they were seen by something larger than gossip. It placed them inside a civic memory where edges were less sharp. You step out into the street with the sound of his pen still faint in your ear. The village has brightened. A boy runs past with a hoop and a stick. A dog sleeps with its nose tucked under its tail. At the house you left earlier, the window stands open a hand's width to let the steam go. The bride's ribbon hangs on a peg, untied and waiting. The groom has a hammer in his hand and is listening to the latch with the patient attention of a man who has decided to fix small things before they become big. Hold this picture. The young couple learning the ordinary arts of care. The midwife carrying a quiet authority that does not need a stage. The clerk writing the town into its own future line by line. Fear is still a guest, but it has been given a smaller chair. In the next part, you will follow the couple to the church porch to witness the blessings that fold a household into the public life of the parish. And then you will hear what the streets sound like at night when rough music tries to correct what the law cannot reach. You reach the church porch at mid-morning when the stone is still cool and the sparrows argue in the ivy. The porch is not only a shelter from rain, it is a stage where promises speak aloud. In many towns, the vows are said here at the threshold between street and nave, so that the community can hear, and then the couple steps inside to receive a blessing. The bride walks slowly, a ribbon at her sleeve, the groom matching his pace to hers, so that the rhythm tells the village that they will measure time together. Bells keep a steady note that sounds less like celebration and more like continuity. Records suggest that porches gathered a whole neighborhood into witness, so that marriage would begin with more than two voices. You stand where the light falls across worn flags and notice the objects that make public life tangible. A shallow stoop by the door holds water with a faint smell of stone. An alms chest sits under a beam that has been carved by hands that believed in sturdy wood. Near the priest, a ledger lies open to receive names and the feast day that fixes them in the town's memory. A ring glints in a palm. A small coin rests in another palm, ready for the poor. These things are not decorations. They are tools that tether the new household to law, charity, and time. Some scholars argue that the porch taught a lesson without a sermon. It said that love lives longer when it borrows strength from habits that have already outlasted many winters. The priest speaks in a tone that is carried through many such mornings. He asks the old questions that protect consent. He names kindness and patience as a craft to be learned, not a mood to be waited for. The bride answers without haste. The groom does the same. He places the ring not as a conquest, but as a circle that promises return. A neighbor coughs softly. A child whispers and then is quiet. The vow settles into the stone like a second layer of mortar. Evidence indicates that in places where records were loose, witnesses served as a living archive. The porch is a safe box for memory because the memory is shared. After the blessing, the crowd loosens into chatter. A small table has been set beside the porch with a jug of ale that tastes faintly of honey. In some English towns, people call this a bride ale, a way to raise small funds for the household and to stitch goodwill into the day. A basket for coins passes without pressure. A loaf is broken and given in uneven pieces that seem fair because they are given with good eyes. The bride receives a small key tied with thread, a promise that when she is ready, it will hang from her belt as a sign that stores and linens and tools will answer to her hand. Some scholars argue that such tokens mattered more than speeches because they distributed authority in ways that neighbors could see. You watch the faces and hear what they say without saying. The marriage has now stepped from private fear to public belonging. This shift does not erase dread, but it puts a fence around it. When gossip later grows bold, it will have to lean over the fence built here and will sometimes think better of it. The couple leaves the porch to walk the lane with measured steps. The ribbon at the bride's sleeve lifts in a small wind. The groom pauses to share a slice of pear with a child who has been trying to look like patience and failing with grace. Ordinary mercy is the daylight face of courage. There is a debated custom that you will meet again after sunset. Some scholars argue that the rough music of a town was a way to correct what law could not reach. Others argue that it was often a license for cruelty disguised as tradition. The name changes by region, but the picture often rhymes. At night, neighbors gather with pans and kettles and a drum that is more noise than instrument. Masks appear, sometimes a hobby horse, sometimes a soot-darkened face, sometimes a cap with bells. They parade past a door to laugh a quarrel into peace or to shame a match that the town cannot make sense of. Evidence indicates that sometimes such processions were playful welcomes for a new household, and sometimes they were punishments that pressed too hard. The line is not clean. That is why fear lingers even after the porch has done its work. Before night, the afternoon offers practices meant to tame the unknown into order. The couple shares a mild meal with kin. The broth is thin and warm with parsley. A small dish of soft cheese sits beside brown bread. The older women show the bride where the stores are kept, how to stack salt to keep damp away, how to wrap a candle so that it will not take the scent of onions. A cousin brings the broom given in part two and places it against the wall with its bristles up so that luck will not be swept out by mistake. A jar with a sprig of rue and rosemary stands near the window. A coin glints under the bedrobe, a little joke that feels like a promise. These are not superstitions here. They are ways to let hands say what mouths are tired of repeating. You are safe. You are not alone. The house has been taught to help. A curious tidbit finds you as the door is barred for evening. In one valley nearby, the groom carries the bride over the threshold not as a show of strength, but as a trick for luck. People say the first person to step into a room teaches the room how to treat the feet that follow. So the carry is less about display and more about a quiet wish that the floor will remember to be kind. The old laugh, the young pretend not to care, and the custom keeps its place because it feels like a way to persuade wood and stone to join in goodwill. Dusk gathers. The street that was a market of words becomes a corridor of listening. A thin moon sits in a notch of cloud. Somewhere a dog makes the sound dogs make when they announce that they have discovered a mystery that is mostly a hedge. The couple sits with a lamp low, not eager for visitors, not eager for noise. They talk in the soft way people talk when the day has carried them farther than they meant to go. The ribbon hangs from a peg. The key waits. Fear is still here, but it is less like a judge now and more like a child that can be distracted. Then from far off, you hear the first metal on metal, a clatter like geese in a quarrel. A pot struck with a spoon, a lid scraped by a ladle, a drum looking for a heartbeat to borrow. Rough music. It travels up the lane with the irregular courage of people who are braver in groups than alone. The bride looks at the door. The groom sets his hand on the latch and then takes it away. It might be a jesting welcome. It might be a warning meant to press them into the right shape, as the town defines it. Records suggest that many such nights ended with laughter and a few red faces, and sometimes a jug shared right there in the lane. Evidence also indicates that sometimes the noise bit too hard and turned fear into a bruise on the mind that did not fade easily. You stand between the porch morning and the rough music night and understand why a first night could feel forbidden, even without an evil law. The pressure is human. It is the weight of many eyes that want the household to fit a picture that keeps their own sleep easy. The couple waits. The sound comes closer. A face painted with soot laughs. A hand beats pan to pan. A cap with bells bobs by the window. You breathe slowly so that the room will remember this pace even if the street forgets it. Hold there at the edge of the noise. In the next part, you will step outside to see how a community decides when to tease and when to shelter, and you will follow the couple through a week of first tasks that turns strangers in a house into two people who know where the cups live and which hinge needs oil, and how to make a place gentle even when the lane will not be. You step out into the lane where the rough music has gathered and stand where lamplight meets shadow. Pans flash like fish scales. A drum looks for a rhythm and keeps losing it. A boy holds a hobby horse made from a broom and tries to look brave. The old men have faces that pretend to be masks, and the young men have masks that pretend to be faces. Then an elder woman steps forward with a jug and a voice that belongs to harvest time, not to quarrels. She lifts her hand and speaks as if she is calling geese in from the field. It is enough. The noise drops from a shout to a murmur. Someone laughs and turns the ladle into a baton and conducts silence. Records suggest that in many towns, the same hands that could rattle tin also knew when to turn teasing into welcome. Communities do not always choose mercy, but tonight this one does. The groom opens the door a hand's width and sets a small cup on the threshold. He does not kneel. He does not bow. He holds the ground of his own doorway and nods to the elder. The bride stands behind him with the lamp low, her ribbon looped over her fingers, like a thought she is not ready to wear. The elder raises the cup, sips, and says that customs are servants, not masters. The neighbors echo her words in shorter versions and let the noise fall apart. A spoon on a pan, a soft drum that loses interest, a few steps backward. Evidence indicates that these tiny negotiations kept peace better than law in a century when courts were slow and winters were quick. By morning, the lane is only a lane again. Frost rimes the hedge and the cold smells faintly of stone and broth. The week begins and you will follow it, because fear retreats when tasks arrive in order. Monday is for washing if the weather permits. Buckets bump against shins as the bride and a cousin cross to the pump. The water lifts heavy and shines in the thin light. Linen soaks in a tub with ash lye that stings the skin and cleans the cloth. A paddle turns the fabric like a quiet oar. The groom mends the hinge on the door with a wedge, and a patient ear oiling the pin until it stops its small complaint. Some scholars argue that survival here is measured not by grand providence, but by the steady correction of small friction. Hinges, ropes, hearts. Tuesday bends toward market. The couple walks with their basket between them, so that weight is an agreement, not a favor. The street beyond their lane opens into stalls where fish glitter on crushed ice in winter, and on wet boards in other months where onions hold their own winter, in tight skins, where wool lies in skeins like sleeping serpents. The clerk you met keeps a corner for measuring and noting. He writes down a promise to pay after shearing and nods to a woman who sells flax tow for spinning. Records suggest that household credit flowed through handwriting and reputations rather than coins alone, and that new couples learned to keep a neat ledger in their heads. Wednesday belongs to bread. The kneading trough stands like a small boat against the wall. The bride sifts coarse flour with a riddle to catch the stone dust. Warm water meets the yeast saved from yesterday's batch, and the dough takes breath. Hands press and fold until the surface learns to shine. The oven has been heated with bundles of brush, the ash is raked, and the stone floor breathes a low heat. A peel slides the rounds inside and the door is set. A curious tidbit rides the steam when the first loaf is marked with the tip of a knife. People in these parts trace a cross on the dough before it bakes. They say it helps the heat find its way and keeps temper from the table. Bakers will tell you it also lets gases escape. Either way, the mark makes a little science feel like a blessing. Thursday draws the distaff out of its corner. The bride sits with the window at her left shoulder so that light falls onto the fibers. The spindle turns and hums its small story of work that takes a long time, but never lies. A neighbor comes by with news that geese will be driven to the stubble field after noon. The groom goes to the yard with a mallet to set a loose fence post right. A boy passes with a hoop and a stick and asks whether the new couple will play at the next Saint's Day. The groom says that if hinges hold and ovens behave, he will try. Evidence indicates that play when it appears is maintenance by another name. It keeps hands familiar and names in good repair. Friday is lean in many houses where fasting has taught the stomach to be patient. The pot takes fish if the river has been kind, or onions and cabbage if the nets were stubborn. A small coin pays the piper for the evening dance on the green if weather softens, but tonight it is cold, so the coin returns to the small jar on the shelf. In the afternoon, the midwife passes the door and leaves a pinch of ground seeds wrapped in paper, not because she fears trouble, but because medicine is more help when it waits in the house before it is needed. The bride thanks her and asks about a woman down the lane whose cough has gone from thin to thick. The midwife says she will stop there next. Some scholars argue that such informal rounds created a net that caught more falls than formal charity could ever boast about. Saturday is for sweeping and for bargaining with time. The broom with the bristles up comes down and learns the corners. Soot lifts from the hearth mouth. The key finds its future place on the bride's belt for an hour, as practice then returns to the peg so that pride does not learn to run before duty can walk. The groom settles with the miller for the last grinding and listens to the slow talk that mills make. Stones speak of patience. Grain speaks of abundance that used to be grass. A tally stick marks a debt paid in flour, and the stick is split so that the two halves match if ever the memory of the bargain grows worn. Records suggest that such simple technologies of trust served as walls that kept storms out when coin was scarce and words were hungry. Sunday folds the week under a simple cloth. The couple stands at the back of the nave and breathes the cold sweetness of stone. Candles write short lines of light across the faces that have been your company all week. The priest reads names from the Board of Intentions and includes a household that has taken a new shape. The bride listens with her hands flat on the bench, and the groom stands with his cap in his hands and his head covered by nothing but sleep. The sermon is less a speech than a rhythm that reminds people when to rise and when to sit and how to listen for words that tame worry. Evidence indicates that the parish taught time even to those who did not follow every rule. Bells are grammar in towns that have more mouths than fences. Between the services and the stew, there is a visit that tests the weak. A man from the far end of the village has been drinking strong ale and speaks too loudly about sheets and signs he did not see. The elder woman from the rough music night raises an eyebrow and walks across the green without hurry. She tells him the story of the week as if reading from a book that his mother used to own. Washing done, market fair, bread set well, hinge quiet, spindle honest. She says that a house that keeps time deserves silence from those who cannot keep their own. He tries to make a joke and cannot find it. He turns away to study the sky as if the clouds have matters to discuss with him. Some scholars argue that reputation is a plain cloth sewn one stitch at a time, and that the first month after a wedding is where the hem is set. As dusk returns, you sit at the hearth with the couple, while the pot gives off a thin comfort. The bride tells the story of the loaf that split perfectly, and the groom tells the story of the latch that no longer complains, and both stories are about breath, air and dough becoming food, air and iron becoming quiet. You note the little jar of salt on the shelf, the tally stick above the door, the peel leaning like a shield, the broom resting, bristles up once more. These are not trophies. They are instruments of a week that did what a week can do. It did not promise to banish fear. It promised to keep fear busy while bread rose and hinges drank oil. Hold this afterglow. In the next part, you will follow the elder to the manor court when a rumor refuses to die and must be walked into daylight. You will hear how a village bargains with honor and how the slow scratch of a clerk's pen can quiet a louder mouth. Between bench and hearth, you will see how fragile beginnings become sturdy enough to carry a winter. You follow the elder woman across the green toward the manor hall, where a horn has been blown and the morning gathers into order. The air is damp and smells of wool and wood smoke. A rook shouts from the ash tree as if it were the beetle. You step inside a room that knows the pace of winter. Rushes hush the floor. A long table waits under a narrow window. The steward sits with a thin rod in his hand, not a scepter, only a stick that means the meeting will have a spine. A few men of the homage stand to one side, the reeve on the other, and the clerk opens a book whose pages have learned to lie flat. Records suggest that such courts did not roar with drama. They kept the tune of a village by writing down small corrections. The elder does not bow like a penitent or posture like a champion. She sets her jug on a bench and looks at the steward with a market day face. There is a rumor, she says, that refuses to die with the embers. It walks from door to door with a cup it did not earn. It names a sheet that no longer lies in the room, and it says more than it knows. Some scholars argue that slander at this scale was not simply unkind talk. It was a tax on a young household, a slow theft of standing that could turn credit to sand and neighbors to weather. The steward nods. He calls for the man whose voice has been the loudest. The man arrives with shoulders too ready and eyes that cannot keep still. He swears he meant nothing by it. He says that he only repeated what a cousin of a neighbor once heard. The steward lifts the rod and lets it return to the table. The clerk dips his pen. Evidence indicates that many manorial courts preferred to mend rather than break. They asked whether a wrong could be folded into peace before it hardened into law. The elder speaks again. She says the midwife is willing to answer for the dignity of the couple, and that mercy will be easy if the man can be taught to carry his tongue differently. The midwife steps forward without ceremony, the strap of her basket creasing her shoulder. She does not swear to miracles. She swears to decency. She says the house is in order, the linen belongs to the sun and soap now, and that pain, where it exists, is being taught to leave without applause. She reminds the hall that houses are not theaters, and that witnesses should be content to witness chores. The steward lets silence settle like flour sifted onto a board. He turns to the jurors, and they speak in low voices. Their hazel wands touch the table one after another, like rain that chooses where to fall. The decision is plain as cloth. The man will stand at the church porch next market day and repeat 3 sentences that the clerk will write for him now. He will bring a small jug of ale to the poor box and a loaf marked with a cross for the midwife to carry on her rounds. He will keep his mouth as carefully as he keeps his tools. If he cannot, he will be at the mercy of the court and pay a fine measured not by wrath, but by a scale that hunger understands. Records suggest that such immersements worked because they returned a story to the people who had to live with it. The steward's rod rests. The clerk writes. You watch the clerk as he bends over the page. He writes the man's name and the place where he lives and the words that must be said aloud. He notes the elder and the midwife as sureties who will answer only for the truth of the morning, not for the future shape of the man's courage. His penknife trims a point from the quill. A pinch of sand drinks the wet from the ink. In the margin, he draws a small mark he uses for matters of reputation, so that if a quarrel seeks this page in another year, his eye will find it before anger does. Some scholars argue that the power of a record lies not in its grandeur, but in its reach. A sheet that can be found is stronger than a speech that cannot be proven. Around the edges of the hall, objects keep telling their quiet lessons. A tally stick rests on a hook, its notches paired with a twin that lives in another house so that a debt can be checked even when memory is tired. A small chest with iron straps holds wax seals and cords. A broom leans against the wall with its bristles up as if luck attends these meetings too. The reeve's pouch holds coins that ring softly when he moves, less a treasury than a sound that reminds everyone that weights must be honest. The steward's rod returns to its nail. The horn is placed by the door. Each thing teaches the same sentence. Keep the village in repair. A curious tidbit slips in with a man whose job is simple and beloved. In some towns, an ale taster tests the brewer's barrel by sitting in fresh ale while wearing leather breeches. If his breeches stick, after a little while, the ale is too thick and the brewer must thin it or face a fine. People tell this with a smile because it is nearly a play. Yet hidden inside is the village logic. Let standards be checked by things that hands can feel. Let fairness be something even a child could explain. When the court is done, the elder woman collects her jug. She does not look triumphant. She looks rested. Outside the hall, she tells you that words do not die by themselves. They must be walked to the place where they cannot pretend to be law. The midwife walks beside her, pleased to have traded ceremony for errands. The clerk remains in his doorway, turning one page back and one page forward, learning how the town will read itself next year. Evidence indicates that in places where justice wore homespun dignity, survived more winters than pride. You cross the green to the couple's door. The hinge does not complain. Inside the house, the bride is plucking a chicken with the calm of a worker who trusts the next hour. The groom checks the rope that tightens the bed and tests it with his hand until the sound pleases him. They listen while the elder repeats the court's decision. They do not cheer, they nod. The bride ties her ribbon again for the first time since the rough music night and hangs the key for an hour at her belt. Not because she must, but because its weight feels like grammar, a small punctuation that lets the day read more clearly. In the afternoon, the man who spoke too loudly comes down the lane with his cap in his hands. He pauses at the threshold and asks if he may read the sentences he will speak on market day. The bride offers the bench by the door. The groom pours water from the pitcher. The man reads slowly like someone learning to set a bone. He stumbles, then finds the pace, and when he is done, he looks at the midwife, who has come by with the habit of a person who makes her rounds even when there is no emergency. She says that bread rises best in a room that does not argue with itself. The man smiles as if she has forgiven more than his words. He leaves walking as if he is carrying a pail he does not want to spill. Evening draws the light thin. You sit again at the hearth where the stew mutters and the comb rests on the chest and the broom's handle shines where many hands have turned it. The couple speaks of small plans. The market needs salt. The roof wants a patch. The elder will come by on Wednesday to show how to set moth herbs among the clothes. Fear visits, but it has learned not to stay long when the room is full of tasks. Hold the sound of the clerk's pen and the weight of the steward's rod returning to its nail. A rumor has been taught to earn its silence. In the next part, you will visit the apothecary and the small shelf of a parish reader to learn what medicine and reading offered to women who feared the first months after marriage. You will handle a sprig of rue, a page from a book of recipes, and a ribbon that some believed could guard a birth, and you will listen for the steady human hope that works quietly beneath legend and law. You step into the apothecary's room at mid-morning when the light is kind and narrow. The door rings a small bell that seems to prefer manners to surprise. Air tastes of honey and vinegar and the faint pepper of ground seed. Jars stand in ranks, glass where coin allows glazed earthenware, where thrift keeps pace, each with a parchment tag tied by linen thread. Angelica roots rest like pale fingers. Fennel seeds wait in a blue bowl. Dried rosemary lies in tidy bundles that still remember a hill facing the sea. A mortar sleeps beneath its pestle as if two old workers were taking turns with breath. Records suggest that such shops held both medicine and reassurance, and that many households came here first not for miracles, but for the steadying of names and weights. The apothecary greets you with a nod that is nearly a bow. He does not ask for a tale. He asks for particulars that a scale can hold. Sleep has been thin. Shoulders ache as if bracing against weather. The stomach forgets to be hungry and then remembers rudely. He listens as the midwife who has joined you as if the road itself invited her lists the small truths of the week. No fevers, no bleeding. A house finding the shape of its hours. Evidence indicates that in many towns, the apothecary and the midwife worked as a pair, one measuring in drachms and scruples, the other measuring in courage and rest. He opens a ledger and writes the date in full. The household by the stream, the purpose written as comfort for new days. He gathers simples rather than proud compounds. A pinch of fennel for a gentle stomach. A few leaves of lemon balm to teach the pulse to walk, not run. A thumb of valerian to persuade sleep to stay when it finally comes. He wraps each measure in paper, ties it with thread, and marks a dot that means steep rather than boil. He says warm, not hot. He says evening, not noon. He says patience, not promise. Some scholars argue that this language did as much work as the herbs because it set expectation in a world where quick cures were rare and slow balance was common. The bride stands by the counter with her ribbon looped over a finger like a bookmark. The groom reads the labels aloud as if tasting the syllables might help him remember the order. A small vial of camphorated oil is placed by the packets with a note to warm it in the hand before it meets his shoulder. The midwife nods and adds that a walk on the sunny side of the lane has often kept a house from inventing troubles to fill an empty afternoon. The apothecary smiles with the careful pride of a man whose trade is to turn fields into sentences that a body can understand. On a shelf above the scales sits a narrow book with pages that have learned the patience of grease and thumbs. The apothecary calls it his book of receipts and secrets, though he says the title with more humor than mystery. He shows a page where a syrup of violets carries a line in a neat hand about cooling a restless heart, and another where a cinnamon cordial is praised only for winter mornings. When frost makes joints, remember the year too sharply. Evidence indicates that such books borrowed from monastic herbals and from the mouths of grandmothers and from traveling sellers who left more stories than change. They were less science than memory written down so that courage would not have to keep every recipe by itself. A curious tidbit arrives as a boy sweeps the threshold. The apothecary tells you that in some places women keep 2 handfuls of wheat and barley in a small cloth, and in the morning they water the seeds and watch which wakes first to guess at childbearing. He does not offer it as truth. He offers it as comfort disguised as a game, a way to put hope where hands can see it. Some scholars argue that such customs kept worry from becoming a quarrel with God by giving it a little work to do with seeds and cups and daylight. You step back into the lane with the packets in a basket. The church bell lets noon pass like a quiet thought. Across the green, a door opens to the parish reader's corner, a place that is not a school and not a shop, but something in between that a village invents when it wants books, without having to argue with the distance to a city. Inside, a carpenter's bench has learned to hold quills and a sand shaker, beside chisels and a square. A shelf carries a small psalter, a primer with letters that have taught many fingers to draw a first name, a homily that names patience more than once, 2 worn leaves from a household book of remedies that drifted here from a cousin who could not read but could value paper, in a thin history that thinks more highly of kings than kings deserve. The reader who keeps parish accounts in winter and cartwheels in summer notes the names and lends in short breaths. He writes the couple into a list that already carries many hands. He offers a psalm for night that sits in the mouth like warm bread. He offers a page that teaches the order of letters A and B and C to any who wish to push a stylus across wax until the shapes feel like tools rather than obstacles. He offers at the midwife's request the copy of the 2 remedy leaves for a week on the condition that the pages return with no grease and the corners unbent. Records suggest that shared reading at this scale did quiet work on fear because it gave people a voice to borrow until their own found enough air. You sit while the reader reads the way a neighbor might hum a tune to show that it can be hummed. He reads from a psalm that calls a room a refuge. He reads a short passage about the good use of time where morning is for work and evening is for peace, rather than for inventions that make hearts race. He reads a line from a letter about charity that begins at the degree a hand can reach. The bride listens without lifting her eyes. The groom watches the tip of the quill as if the feather knows something he has always wanted to hear. Some scholars argue that literacy at this level did not flood villages with debates. It taught a cadence, and cadence is a discipline that helps the mind keep its place. Around the room, objects continue their lectures in quiet. A slate leans against a peg with sums chalked in that explain how much flour a coin will buy after the next milling. A box holds copying lists where children have traced letters into wax until the grooves guide them like ruts in a good road. A little packet of pounce waits to roughen a page so that ink behaves. The reader's knife edges a quill with short, careful strokes that sound like a clock for people who do not own a clock. Evidence indicates that the habit of reading aloud in such corners replaced rumor with sentences that could be repeated without growing teeth. By late afternoon, you carry the borrowed pages home alongside the apothecary's packets. In the house, the lamp is set low, and the window learns dusk. The midwife shows the bride how to steep the leaves without scalding the water, and how to wait for steam the way one waits for bread to rise without staring too hard. She shows the groom how to warm the little vial in his hands until the oil chooses to flow. She ties a tiny sachet of dill and balm to hang near the bed, a scent that reminds the room to prefer sleep over talk. She tells them that fear can be persuaded, not conquered, and that persuasion is a craft to be practiced softly every day. The bride asks a careful question about the months ahead. The midwife does not answer with predictions. She answers with a map of attention. If appetite returns in a gentle rhythm, if strength grows without boasting, if mornings bring a steadier breath. She explains which signs call for her knock at the door, and which for the priest, and which for the apothecary not to stir alarm, but to make fear stand in the right corner and keep quiet. Records suggest that this partitioning of worry allowed many households to pass through the first seasons of marriage without letting anxieties devour the food meant for the table. Night gathers. The couple shares a bowl of warm broth. The reader's psalm is read aloud in a voice that is not musical but is honest. The packets sit like small promises near the comb and the key in the broom. The window shows a white star that has followed the lane since you began this watching. The house breathes. The midwife collects her basket. The elder woman will stop by tomorrow with a story about a hedge that taught a child to be patient. The village is a net the wind cannot see, but the heart can feel. Hold this quiet. In the next part, you will return to the winter fair, where lights and smoke and fiddles argue kindly with the cold, and you will follow the couple through a last turning of the lane to learn how a night once feared becomes an ordinary memory that the house carries without pain. Between fair and firelight, the story will close around them like a shawl and show how survival becomes peace. You arrive at the winter fair while frost stitches thin lace across the puddles and the air smells of smoke, wool, and cloves. Torches lean in iron brackets along the green. A fiddler tests a tune that walks rather than runs. The stalls are humble but proud. Baskets of apples with their skins rubbed bright. A tray of nuts warmed in a pan. A jug of spiced wine breathing a slow red comfort. A woman sells ribbons that remember summer fields, and a baker lifts round loaves scored with signs that the village understands without needing a lesson. Records suggest that fairs in the dark months were not only markets. They were rehearsals for courage, a way to tell the town that scarcity could be answered with company. You keep to the edge where shadow and light shake hands. The couple walks together as if they had practiced it all week, which of course they have. The bride's ribbon now ties her hair rather than her hands. The groom greets the miller, then the clerk, then the elder, with the slow manners of a man who has learned how to keep time. The midwife, basket on her arm, smiles with the quiet satisfaction of a worker whose craft is mostly invisible and mostly successful. Some scholars argue that a community teaches belonging by repeating names in public until the names stop bracing for impact. The fair is one of those lessons that does not wear a robe or carry a rod. It carries a song and a loaf and the relief of ordinary errands. You watch the couple pause at the baker's stall. The baker lifts a loaf and turns it to show the cross, cut before baking, a mark part blessing and part physics. He wraps the bread in a square of cloth and tucks in a small heel as a gift. The bride thanks him and slips a coin into the small dish where the poor may later find a supper. Nearby, the clerk buys a bundle of quills and a little packet of sand and nods to the groom as if sealing a page that both will someday read. Evidence indicates that such small exchanges did more than fill pantries. They wrote reputations in gestures that everyone could remember. The fiddler's tune finds a rhythm. Children chase after the hobby horse from the rough music night, but tonight the laughter is simple and no face is sooted. The elder woman lifts a cup and tells a story that makes the young blush and the old pretend not to. Her voice folds the street into a room. A man who once preferred noise over kindness raises his cap to the couple and asks after the hinge, and the groom says that it no longer complains. The answer is plain, but it carries the weight of a treaty. Some scholars argue that peace often arrives disguised as maintenance. They buy a paper twist of sugared almonds if the purse can bear it, or roasted chestnuts if not, and share them without measuring. A curious tidbit rides the steam from the pan. People in one nearby town, the elder says, mark the first loaf of the year with the first letter of the family name, then hang the heel by the door until Candlemas to persuade luck to learn the house more carefully. Whether or not this works is not the point. It gives worried hands a task that is not unkind. Snow begins the light kind that tries ideas before weather. Beneath the flakes, you see the village as a net that does not show itself until stress tightens it. The apothecary passes with a nod and a small pouch of balm for an elder's hands. The reader from the parish corner walks with a child who has learned to write his initial in wax and cannot stop telling people about it. The midwife stops by the candlemaker and chooses tapers that will burn without scolding a room. The couple pauses at each face. Names are spoken. Eyes meet. The night that once felt forbidden becomes a path that can be walked and walked again without fear. They carry home what the fair allowed. A loaf under one arm, a twist of nuts, the smallest of candles to make evenings behave. The door opens to a room that now knows their footsteps. The broom rests with its bristles up the lesson remembered. The key hangs from the peg and will travel to the belt tomorrow at noon as a sign that stores and linens and tools answer to a hand that has learned its own pace. The comb waits on the chest. The sachet of dill and balm hangs by the bed like a whisper that prefers sleep to argument. Evidence indicates that this arrangement of small things is not decoration. It is a domestic grammar by which a household tells itself the truth. You sit by the hearth as the first snow thickens. The pot sighs, the couple break the crust and share the heel and the crumb. They speak of next week in practical nouns: salt, roof, ledger, rope for the bed. They speak of the elder's story about the loaf at the door and decide to save a heel, not because they are superstitious, they say, but because it will please the old and teach patience to a morning. They place the heel on a small wooden peg. They pour a little wine and thin it with water. They warm the vial of oil between their palms and trade the slow comfort of shoulders that no longer brace for a verdict. The midwife comes to the door once more as the snow finds its confidence. She checks faces the way sailors check lines. She asks how sleep has behaved and whether the broth helped and whether the walk in the sun was taken when the ground was dry. She looks at the ribbon where it holds hair, at the key on the peg, at the broom and the loaf and the heel at the quiet. She smiles and speaks a blessing that is made only of ordinary words arranged carefully. Then she leaves them to the work of peace, which is never an accident. Records suggest that fear does not vanish. It learns to stay in the corner that is its size. You remember the old tale that travels farther than evidence, the one about a lord's right that records do not support well. You think again of why the first night felt forbidden, even without such a law. It was forbidden by too many eyes and too much pressure and medicine that was not yet safe, in a hunger for proofs that bodies could not always provide. Some scholars argue that what lifts that kind of prohibition is not bravery in a single hour, but the slow courage of a week repeated many times until it becomes a year. Each repetition stitches the house more tightly to the village and the heart more gently to the day. The couple bank the fire. They set a little bowl of water near the hearth for a stray cat that has appointed itself a witness. The window holds a pale star. The reader's psalm waits on the table, and the groom's handwriting next to the first line now shows a steadier hand proof that practice is a patient friend. The bride places the packets from the apothecary in a small box and writes a scrap of a label so that evening will not have to guess. The room has learned to let them decide the pace. That is a kind of freedom. Hold this last picture. A house where linen is only cloth, not a verdict. A key that is weight, not a threat. A broom that keeps luck and dirt in their proper places. A ledger that can be found when memory grows thin. A midwife's basket that teaches dignity. A clerk's hand that makes fair fights fairer. A fair that sings not of spectacle, but of belonging. Evidence indicates that rest is possible where tasks and tenderness keep each other honest. If you are listening in the dark, breathe with the slow work of the room. Let the hush of snow teach your shoulders to come down. Let the faint spice in the air, the soft crack of bread, the tick of cooling iron name the hour gentle. Fear can stand by the door and keep the draft company. You do not need to follow it into the lane. Tonight, the first night, is only an old story among many, and the house will carry it without pain. When you are ready, let your eyes close. The village keeps watch. The fire knows when to rest. The morning will come with its small errands and its honest light, and you will know where the cups live.